says the issue is real in the Austin neighborhood. Some local officials are calling on Governor Pritzker to declare a state of emergency and seek federal dollars. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Seeing a busy drive as you travel Downey. It's going to be a problem in Rosemead. It looks like Monterey Park, a crash partially blocking lanes on that 60 west around Atlantic, partially blocking a traffic lane here. Busy from Paramount. The 60 east at Rosemead Boulevard, second lane from the left is tied up with a collision. We're loaded up here from Paramount Boulevard. South LA, somebody broke it down to the 110 north at Manchester, stuck in the center divider. And Downey, it's a stalled vehicle here on the 105 west at Lakewood Boulevard. That is in the right lane, and it has slowed the drive from at least the 605 freeway.
Bank of America has powerful digital solutions for local and global businesses, so you can make every move matter. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. Bank of America, N.A. Copyright 2023.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Chris Eubanks has two very important distinctions attached to his name. He's only the third Black American male tennis player to reach the quarterfinals at Wimbledon. He's also the only American male left on the Wimbledon bracket. Eubanks, who grew up in Atlanta, continues his push towards history tonight. He faces Daniil Medvedev of Russia in the quarterfinals. Only two other Black American males made it to the Wimbledon quarterfinals. The legendary Arthur Ashe did it in 1968, 1969, and 1975. Malachi Washington made it in 1996. The Dodgers will have three starters in tonight's Major League Baseball All-Star game in Seattle. Right fielder Mookie Betts, first baseman Freddie Freeman, and designated hitter J.D. Martinez. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
2 years ago, on Juneteenth 2021, KBLA Talk 1580 launched with a promise to give disenfranchised fellow citizens a voice in current political, economic, social, and cultural issues with an empowering, sustainable, and restorative language.
Everybody's gotta live the life under the sun, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun.
As we enter our third year, we are delighted that KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerges as the talk station of choice for African American listeners. In a vigorous public opinion research study, the 2023 African American Media Issue Survey finds that for the second consecutive year, KBLA Talk 1580 remains the most trusted, credible, and reliable media source in Southern California for African Americans and beyond. Furthermore, 80% of those surveyed agree that outlets like KBLA Talk 1580 provide honest and authentic content about the issues most important to the Black community directly from Black journalists who understand the issues that need to be addressed. At KBLA Talk 1580, we remain committed to curating conversations that matter to you. Thank you for your continued support. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. The station that sounds like the city looks. The city looks.
Tavis Smiley. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Our phone number 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. Glad to have you with us in this hour. And in this hour, can we draw connections between the struggles faced by enslaved women in the antebellum era and the ongoing fight for equality Black women are yet waging today? Moreover, what are the dangers of today's jurisprudence reproducing a litany of slavery-era ideas? We'll talk about it right now for the hour with Cornell University professor and author Dr. Tamika Y. Nunley. Professor Nunley, good to have you on this program. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's my great delight to have you. There's a lot here to try to unpack in this hour. And I literally was up early this morning trying to figure out where to commence this conversation. And I think I want to begin here, and we'll let it do what it do as we move
hmm
through the hour. But before I get into your text, the demands of justice, which we'll talk about again as we move through this hour. I was
hmm
fascinated by a piece you wrote recently in the Washington Post. The title of that piece is "The Danger of Today's Jurisprudence Reproducing Slavery Era Ideas." Give me a second here
hmm
just to opine, and then I'll throw some questions at you. So some years ago, before Donald Trump was elected president, I was on one of the Sunday morning programs, ABC This Week, as I recall, with George Stephanopoulos. And I
hmm
made a comment that just sent people into 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 a fit. And the
hmm
and the comment I made was that I could see in the not too distant future, if this Supreme Court continued in the way that it was going, and at the time it wasn't even 6-3, the way it is today.
hmm
I posited then that we may look up one day and see efforts to make black folk 3/5 of a person once again. And,
hmm
and, and I wasn't at all I wasn't kidding, I wasn't joking, I was being very serious because I was concerned even then about the way our jurisprudence, the way our system, our judicial
hmm
system was starting to advance notions that I thought were really, really dangerous. And I could see then we were on a slippery slope. This was before they wiped out affirmative action. This was before all of these book bans started. This was before the
Right.
attack on critical race theory. I'm not calling myself a savant. I'm not calling myself prophetic. What I'm saying is I could read even then that we were headed in a dangerous direction. Here you come now in 2023, basically echoing what I said then, that there is a danger that
hmm
we are witnessing in real time about our jurisprudence reproducing slavery era ideas. And I wonder if we can begin our conversation by you just unpacking that notion. Take it anywhere you want to take it. We've got an hour. Take your time, but just unpack why you feel as I feel and felt some years ago.
Absolutely. So this case that I was talking about in the Washington Post was a case involving reproductive technologies and the development of embryos using in vitro fertilization. And in order to resolve a dispute between a husband and wife in Virginia, a Virginia judge rules using slave laws that basically legitimize using human people, right, and embryos as property, that they could be designated and used as property legally. And so he's using actually slave codes
Mm-hmm.
um, from the 19th century in order to make this decision and advance this preliminary opinion. And what's apparent that, and not always apparent to everybody else, is that most slave statutes throughout the slave states have not been repealed.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of judges in these states where slavery existed can actually repurpose and use those slave laws in order to advance certain legal logics for cases that come up today in the docket. And that is problematic, particularly as we see the sort of constant unraveling of our rights,
Mm-hmm.
as we see these judicial cases being decided upon in ways that really reverse a lot of the gains of the civil rights and the women's rights movements. And so we find ourselves in a really in dangerous situation, to your point. And, I do agree, right, that if we aren't vigilant, and if we're not really paying attention, what we will miss is a really sort of long-standing effort to continue to chip away at the rights of Black folks.
Yep. So let me pick up on the point you made just now, which is that there are states all across this country that have not as yet in 2023 repealed any number of slave statutes. So these
hmm
statutes are laws that are still on the books in states literally from California to the Carolinas. I ain't telling you what I heard, I'm telling you what I know. I've done the research on this.
hmm
So from California to the Carolinas, there are any number of states, a plethora of states, who still have these
hmm
slave statutes on the books as a matter of law. They've not been repealed. I am not naive in asking this. Why do you think that is? Just an oversight on somebody's part? I think not. You tell me.
Well, I think that there's always been a longstanding resistance to changing the laws that have been passed in this country, right? Unless it sort of advances a sort of a transformative legal effort, we oftentimes tend to defer back to the status quo. And that's what we've seen, not only with these slave statutes, but also just even with our Supreme Court today, right? Just this longstanding resistance that's been mounted by the conservative movement to continue to chip away at what little gains we've been able to hold on to from different grassroots movements.
Yeah. How concerned then should we be? How serious is the danger of judges today, jurisprudence today, reproducing slavery era ideas and slavery era consequences and repercussions, if I can put it that way?
Absolutely. I mean, we should be very concerned. And Michigan State University, their College of Law, has been tracking all the ways in which different courts have been using and drawing upon slave statutes as good law to be applied to current legal issues. And if we don't begin to sort of address this, this is going to be a part of our future. It's going to be imprinted in how we litigate and how we try to advance certain arguments that move beyond these slave statutes.
Mm-hmm.
So we should absolutely be concerned. And I think you were right to put that thought out there to get us to really think about how our legal system is structured and the scaffolding involved in order to continue to bring us back to the past.
Mm-hmm. I love your use of the word scaffolding. That's exactly what we're experiencing and witnessing even as we speak. Let me ask you, you're a professor, so you teach this stuff every day. In talking about these slave statutes, these laws that are still on the books in states all across this country that have not yet been repealed, whose responsibility, and I suspect the answer may change depending on what state you're talking about, maybe not, you tell me, but how would we in 2023 get these laws off the books? Is this a legislature issue? Is this how would that work?
Yeah, I think that being attentive not only to how we're voting sort of on a broader level throughout this country, right? We put so much effort and focus on electoral politics as it pertains to who's going to be in Senate and who's going to be in Congress. But even in our state legislatures, this is where we're seeing a lot of the battle unfolding, particularly around book bans, around CRT, right? And so being attentive to those local elections and who we're electing to these state legislatures and to also the state Supreme Courts are going to be really important in that effort to dismantle all of these sort of legal codes that had accumulated over time.
But dismantling these legal codes would be the responsibility of the legislature in that state, in said state?
Yes. Yeah, it would be the legislature of that state, depending on the state. Every state is going to be different, particularly as we think about the South versus the North. But really, this is sort of work. This is why I use the term scaffolding, right? Because there are layers upon layers and years and centuries of lawmaking that have occurred. And this is why people are resistant to changing it, right? Because they reify this sort of centuries of lawmaking in American jurisprudence. This American legal tradition is something that is revered. And so as a result, people are less inclined to try to change it. But we have to really put pressure on our lawmakers, their judges, the legislators, the politicians, to really begin to get them to grapple with the ethical implications of continuing to use slave law.
Yep. This is not an irrational fear. You see why when I read her piece in the Washington Post, it got my attention because, again, there are so many states in this country that still have these slave statutes, these slave laws, as it were, on the books. And there are judges who are increasingly making decisions, as she detailed in this piece, making decisions based on slave era statutes, slave era laws. When you combine that reality with the funny style way that this present U.S. Supreme Court is moving to constrict rights, to reduce rights, not expand rights. I've said many times on this program, our country is at its best when we're expanding rights, not shrinking rights. But when you combine these decisions that judges in Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia and beyond are making these days based on a variety of slave statutes and slave laws, you combine that with what the Supreme Court is doing, you see it's a toxic mix. and something that we ought to take seriously. Sadly, as you heard Professor Nunley say a moment ago, it's the legislature in these states who be responsible for repealing these laws, and that ain't going to happen no time soon, particularly in these red states. But I'm raising this flag and I'm waving it high so everybody can see it. This is a serious issue that we need to spend more time sort of dissecting. And we'll do that when we come forward. Our guest in this hour, Dr. Tamika Nunley, who you're listening to right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
Are you looking to steer your career in a new direction? Driving for Culver City Bus can be your ticket to a long-lasting career with excellent benefits and paid training. Culver City Bus is looking for customer service and safety-minded bus operators to join the growing team. Culver City Bus offers on-the-job training starting at $19.10 per hour, uniform allowance, and health benefits. Culver City Bus is a great employer. Let Culver City Bus connect you with an essential service job. If you enjoy driving, seek real opportunities for career advancement, and passionate about making a difference in the community, then you are invited to join the Culver City Bus team. Start your journey today by submitting an application at culvercity.org/jobs. For more info, visit culvercitybus.com or call live customer service operators at 310-253-6500.
JP Morgan Chase is building on the investments in California and around the country to help close the racial wealth gap and build a more equitable future. As part of JP Morgan Chase commitment, they are taking action to help improve financial wealth and access to banking in the Black community, helping more people open low-cost checking and savings accounts, hosting community seminars with supporting Black-led institutions by building awareness about financial investments, hiring community managers, and opening community center branches like Crenshaw, Inglewood, and downtown LA. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Get the tools to help reach your financial goals. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity.
She's so smooth, so... I'm interrupting my own shower to remind you to treat your skin like the queen she is with Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash, packed with Olay's highest level of vitamin B3 complex. It's so moisturizing that it will give you visibly smoother, head-turning skin in just 14 days. People wondering, how'd she get so smooth? Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash. Also, try Olay Hyaluronic Body Lotion.
Okay, team, line's already around the block, and we're open in 10. Yesterday, we had 3-hour wait time.
Chef Pierre's staff is a little under-seasoned.
Why is this pot not boiling yet?
An experienced sous chef is the missing ingredient in his kitchen.
What do you mean, plate or a bowl? You work at La Pasta in La Cup.
Indeed can help him hire great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. You can schedule and conduct virtual interviews all from your employer dashboard. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Dr. Tamika Nunley is our guest in this hour, and we are talking about a society where injustices persist and whether or not we can draw connections between the struggles faced by enslaved Black women back in the day, in the antebellum era, and the ongoing fight that women are still waging for equality, Black women today. Before I get into your book, there's one other thing I want to ask about with regard to scaffolding, which we were discussing earlier. Maybe that's the word of the day, scaffolding, that you were talking about. And I want to go directly to your Washington Post piece. Again, for those who want to find this piece and read it for yourself, Washington Post, it's called "The Danger of Today's Jurisprudence Reproducing Slavery-Era Ideas." Let me read one paragraph that I want you to just sort of expound upon, if you will, Professor Nunley, and then we'll move from there. I quote from your column, from your piece. "Slave laws protected the rights of enslavers to own and sell Black people, which involved exerting control over reproduction. For example, a 1662 law in Virginia made slavery inheritable through enslaved women. At the time, English common law determined most cases involving inheritance on the basis of the paternity of the child. But new laws were created in the colonies, and these slave laws ensured that enslavers maintained legal access to to the reproductive capacities of enslaved women. That's a lot to process, Professor Nunley.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But let's talk about it, right? So when we think about inheritance and the tradition of English common law, right, most children inherit, a lot has changed today, but most children in the past inherited their father's name. They oftentimes, inheritance is passed through the father. Well, in Virginia, they changed the law when they had the colony here to ensure that that inheritance of slavery went through the wombs of enslaved women. And so what this meant is that if an enslaved man actually had a child with a white woman, that child was entitled to freedom. But if an enslaved woman were to bear that child would be enslaved for life, right? And so codifying that one law would have implications for generations of Black people and African descended people throughout this nation, right? And so even as the United States in 1808 closes itself from the transatlantic slave trade, the population naturally reproduces, and I say naturally in quotation marks, right, because we have this law, but right, the slaveholders are allowed to manipulate the reproductive labor of enslaved women in order to grow the enslaved population in the United States and therefore the African American community.
So, link for me these struggles vis-a-vis jurisprudence then and the ongoing fight that Black women are engaging for equality today.
Right. And so right now we are dealing currently with a Black maternal health crisis that has gotten a lot of attention with Congress and Senate recently, and also as a result of a lot of Black women activists who have been organizing to address this maternal health crisis. And that oftentimes is linked, right, to Black women's relationship to political institutions, to medical institutions, to the law, right, that has been in process over time and for generations. And so we're still dealing with, right, the reduction of our reproductive rights. We are also dealing with a confrontation of obstetrical violence in the hospitals. And so this journey of sort of dealing with Black women's reproductive lives is ongoing. It's something that has constantly had to be addressed, and it has its origins in a law like 1662 Parta Sequitur Ventrum, right, that slavery is inherited through the wombs of enslaved women.
Let me read to you, speaking of reading, I read a piece from your column. Let me jump to another story that I want to read from that literally is in the news today. You are not just a brilliant professor, but you are prescient and prophetic, given what I'm about to read to you right now. This is in the Los Angeles Times. And here's the headline. Cedars-Sinai faces federal civil rights investigation over treatment of Black mothers. Talk about a link and talk about the timing of the link. Cedars-Sinai is the #1 hospital in California, known around the world. #1 hospital in California, the #2 hospital in the nation. If you were in LA right now, you'd see billboards everywhere. I saw one yesterday where Cedars-Sinai is bragging that they are the #1 hospital in California. Indeed, they are. They're the #2 hospital in the nation, and they are facing a federal civil rights investigation right now over the treatment of Black mothers. Let me read the first 2 paragraphs. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center is facing a federal civil rights investigation over how the Los Angeles hospital treats Black women who give birth there. An official with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services confirmed. The investigation comes after allegations of racism and discrimination emerged in the years after the death of Kira Dixon Johnson. Johnson went to Cedars in April 2016 to deliver her second son by cesarean section, but died hours later after hemorrhaging blood. Her husband, Charles Johnson IV, filed a lawsuit against the hospital over her death. In fact, 2 lawsuits. Both of those lawsuits, Cedars-Sinai settled. He filed 2 lawsuits. Cedars settled both of those lawsuits. But now, I'm sure he is relieved that the federal government now has gotten involved in looking at civil rights violations of Black mothers at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. How's that for a link to what you were just talking about, Professor Nunley?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mr. Johnson has been such a champion for Black women's maternal health. I remember reading his testimony before the Committee on Oversight and Reform for Congress. And he's been such a champion to advocate for Black women's maternal health and telling his wife's story, which is a tragedy, right? And should not be happening in our hospital systems. But there's something broken. There's something broken in how medical professionals, providers are treating Black women, how the law treats Black women's reproductive lives. That has to be addressed. It's unacceptable for a country with our resources and with our professed values.
Again, not naive in asking this question, but why in 2023 are we even seeing stories like this where Black mothers, Black women are being treated differently, maltreated to the point of death in some of the leading hospitals in this country?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our doctors who don't have proximity to the Black experience are not trained to see Black women as human, right? Many of them have been socialized their whole lives not to even see us, right? To deem Black women's bodies as invisible. And so therefore, they're not going to see our pain. They're not going to see our medical conditions. They're not going to see when we are actually in need of help. And that has sort of more to do with this nation and sort of where we are and how our values are reflected in how people are educated in the medical education system, right? But also in the laws, right? In the prisons, Black women are being chained to their beds as they are delivering children as we speak. Today. And so we have a lot of work to do to begin to grapple with why Black women are experiencing these types of birthing experiences and also some tragedies.
Yeah. Let me go straightway then into your book, The Demands of Justice, Enslaved Women, Capital Crime, and Clemency in Early Virginia. That's the focus of your research. And let me just ask you a broad question and we'll build from there. Tell me what you learned. There's a whole book, obviously, that you've written about it. But top line for me, what you learned in your research about, the way these enslaved women were handled or not, as it were, back in the day.
Yeah, I'll tell you what actually drove me to write this book.
Please.
I wrote this book during the pandemic. I wrote this when we were protesting, when we were professing that Black Lives Matter. And I just remember being in Cleveland, being at a protest, and trying to figure out, why are we all out here? We are all out here with no guarantee that anybody's going to listen. Right. But we're out here because we're hoping to expand the scope and the reach of justice. To be accessible, not just to the few, but to everybody, right? We're hoping for a more democratic idea, a concept of justice. And how long have we been doing this? And that's when I began to sort of tap into my research as a historian of slavery. And I began to think about, what do the resistive sort of actions of enslaved women tell us about what they thought about justice? Something that they experienced, something about what they endured, brought them to these actions. And this was their articulation of what was right and what was wrong. Even though the law said that what they did by killing their masters, right, by attempting to murder them or to poison them was wrong. But what they were saying was that there's some other ideas about what's right and wrong, and that's what they're responding to.
And what, broadly speaking, were they trying to articulate then?
They were trying to articulate that you could not do what you wanted with me, right, with my person, with my body, right? And so a lot of what brought these women to try to attempt to kill their enslavers, the children of their enslavers, and even to kill their own children, was a response oftentimes to the kind of cruelty and brutality that they experienced, the kind of violence that had been inflicted upon their bodies, which brought them right to a point of desperation to say, I can no longer tolerate this. I'd rather be executed. I'd rather be subject to whatever the justice system is going to do to me than to continue to live through this reality.
Your latter comment made me think almost immediately of the brilliant Toni Morrison and her work, Beloved. And when we come forward after news, traffic, and sports, I want to come right to that. This notion that these women were so determined to fight against this white supremacy that many of them would kill their own babies. Draws a straight line to the brilliant Toni Morrison's work. We'll talk about that when we come forward. You heard a reference being at a Black Lives Matter protest in Cleveland. As you heard earlier in this program today, we are celebrating this week the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. That anniversary is on the 13th of this week, and then later this weekend, a big celebration here in Los Angeles on the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matters. She is Dr. Tamika Nunley, a historian, so I certainly want to get her take on BLM 10 years in. A great deal more to talk about when we come forward with Dr. Tamika Nunley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. It still isn't clear how a small bag of cocaine ended up in the White House. The Secret Service is continuing its investigation into who brought the drugs into the West Wing and could wrap it up early this week. Agents found the powder during a routine sweep of the building on July 2nd while President Biden and his family were at Camp David for the holiday weekend. In Ohio, the search continues for a man that police say shot 9 people early Sunday morning in Cleveland's Warehouse District. Authorities have only been able to say that the shooting suspect is a black male who was wearing dark clothing and possibly has a gold-mouth grill. A local resident who owns 2 businesses near where the shooting occurred has said he is putting up a $50,000 reward. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Bank of America has powerful digital solutions for local and global businesses, so you can make every move matter. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. Bank of America, N.A. Copyright 2023.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Chris Eubanks has 2 very important distinctions attached to his name. He's only the 3rd black American male tennis player to reach the quarterfinals at Wimbledon. He's also the only American male left on the Wimbledon bracket. Eubanks, who grew up in Atlanta, continues his push towards history tonight. He faces Daniil Medvedev of Russia in the quarterfinals. Only 2 other black American males made it to the Wimbledon quarterfinals. The legendary Arthur Ashe did it in 1968, 1969, and 1975. Malachi Washington made it in 1996. The Dodgers will have 3 starters in tonight's Major League Baseball All-Star game in Seattle. Right fielder Mookie Betts, first baseman Freddie Freeman, and designated hitter J.D. Martinez. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like Sprinklers in the Rain and Leaky Faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Drip.
You're ready to level up to your next home or your first home, but maybe you still have some questions. Come check out Rocket. We're ready to help. Start with a Rocket Mortgage home buying plan and get Rocket rewards along the way for cash toward closing. You got this, and Rocket's got you. Only with Rocket. Visit RocketBuyingPlan.com to get started today.
Call 866-357-5727 for conditions and restrictions. Equal housing lender license in all 50 states. NMLSConsumerAccess.org, number 3030.
Don't settle for bumps, ingrowns, and itch due to dry skin. Venus for Pubic Hair and Skin is here with the only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area, featuring a razor with a patented irritation defense bar and skincare regimen that is dermatologist and gynecologist tested. Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Visit GilletteVenus.com to learn more about our full regimen of products.
Black Lives Matters turns 10, and KBLA Talk 1580 is proud to be the exclusive media partner of the People's Justice Festival. This Saturday, July 15th, 12 to 6 p.m. in Leimert Park. Come join us as we celebrate the life-saving and history-making work of Black Lives Matter to help bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. There will be live music performances, a children's village, giveaways, vendors, a healing justice space, Skillshare, and amazing speakers including Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Cornell West, live on stage at 4:30 p.m. For more information, go to blmgrassroots.org. That's www.blmgrassroots.org. Dominique DePrima and Tavis Smiley will be main stage hosts throughout the day, and the KBLA Talk 1580 delegation will be out in full force. So, join us this Saturday, July 15th, 12 to 6 p.m. in Leimert Park as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
I done plant my seeds, now I'm rooted. Brown skin popping, I'm rooted. Can pull the hood out me, I'm rooted. Rooted, nappy head, rooted, rooted.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
You know that Big Bargain detergent jug is 85% water, right?
85% water? I thought I was getting a better deal because it's so big.
If you want a better clean, Tide Pods are only 12% water. The rest is pure, concentrated cleaning ingredients.
Ooh, pass me the intercom thingy.
Attention shoppers, if you want a real deal, try Tide Pods.
Don't pay for water, pay for clean. If it's gotta be clean, it's gotta be Tide Pods.
Water content based on the leading bargain liquid detergent.
We're not for everybody, but we're for everybody. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Tavis Smiley. Glad to have you with us. In case you've just tuned in, our guest in this hour is Dr. Tamika Nunley. She is an award-winning historian, associate professor of history at Cornell University. Has a book out called The Demands of Justice, Enslaved Women, Capital Crime, and Clemency in Early Virginia. We're talking in this hour about the connections that can, in fact, be drawn, need, in fact, be drawn between the struggles faced by enslaved black women in the antebellum era and the ongoing fight for black women's equality today. In case you've just tuned in, we were talking moments ago about a breaking news story relative to Cedars-Sinai Hospital here in Southern California. In L.A., the number one hospital in California, number two hospital in the nation. They are now the subject of a federal civil rights investigation over the maltreatment of black mothers, one or more who've died at Cedars-Sinai. So this maltreatment of black mothers at Cedars here in Los Angeles is now the subject, again, of a federal investigation. And that weaves quite nicely into, tragically, but nicely into our conversation in this hour about black women then, black women now, and how the struggle continues. You posited something before that break, Professor Nunley, that, as I mentioned, took me straight to Toni Morrison. I'll let you make the connection. You know where I'm going, so you go ahead and lead us there.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a whole chapter in the book devoted to infanticide and enslaved women who stood accused of killing their children. And it absolutely invokes Toni Morrison's treatment of Margaret Garner in Beloved, this idea that they would rather commit their children to another future, to an afterlife, that is beyond this world, rather than have them subject and suffer under this system of chattel slavery and all that came with that, right? And so these women in this book in particular are a lot of different kinds of iterations of that story that happen in Virginia. Women who go to take desperate measures in order to kill their children, but in their eyes also to protect them from what awaits them during slavery. And this becomes also particularly acute for women who have little girls, because they know that their enslaver is going to have access to their bodies in ways that force them into adulthood even sooner than their white peers would be.
Yep. This is a difficult question, but I'm going to ask you because you're a professor and you can handle it. When you spend part of your book writing an entire chapter about infanticide, when we think about Beloved, again, Toni Morrison's brilliant work, the film directed by Jonathan Demme, who won the Academy Award for Silence of the Lambs. I knew Jonathan Demme well, a good friend of mine. God rest his soul, but Demme was an amazing filmmaker. But when you think about the film, you think about the book, you think about your book, about that chapter on infanticide. How do you? Here's my question, and it's hard to get out. How do we give me a way in for us to have a conversation about what we think about that, which is different than asking you specifically what you think about it. But give me a frame. That's what I'm looking for. Give me a frame for how we have a conversation about infanticide and decide what we think of, what we make of these women back then who would kill their own babies. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think, you begin to have that conversation by asking, what was slavery? What was slavery in America, right? And I think we casually allow slavery to roll off of our tongues, particularly when we're talking about American history and politics, particularly when we're referring back to the founding generation, the founding fathers, right? Slavery rolls off of our tongues in this really casual way. But when we really begin to stop and think and ponder, what was slavery? What was its impact? What was the everyday of slavery? That's when we can begin our entry point into how an enslaved mother arrives at the decision to kill her child, right? You can't start there, right? Because it feels just sort of abrupt. It feels over the top. But when you begin to understand just how over the top slavery itself was and the everyday experiences of the enslaved and children, right? That's when you begin to understand why these women might arrive at the difficult decision that they arrive at. It feels unfathomable to us right now, but when we really begin to understand the cruelty that slavery allowed for, the level of brutality that our nation's laws allowed for when it comes to the lives of Black people, we begin to sort of see the bigger picture, right, of how a Margaret Garner comes to be, how Toni Morrison begins to write a Beloved. You begin to see sort of lift a veil, so to speak, the cover off of our past, the kinds of aspects of our past that we like to shy away from.
Yeah. Because we're drawing linkages here between Black women in the antebellum era and Black women today and their ongoing fight for equality, let me draw another linkage. We're not talking about infanticide because that would land you in prison these days. So we're not talking about infanticide, but there are a plethora of examples. I'll yield to you in a moment here. There are any number of examples that I can think of, and you can think of more, I'm sure, of the ways in which Black women have to go in real time, in late modernity, to extreme lengths to protect and preserve their precious babies. Talk to me about that linkage, even today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Elizabeth Alexander came out with this book about the generation of Trayvon Martin, and in some ways, she talks about how this idea of protecting your Black child is almost magical thinking, right? To do so is to really hope beyond hope that you actually can do this, that's possible in the United States. But something about the state of our society and the ways in which we see Black bodies as disposable and the level of anti-Black violence that we've witnessed tells us, right, that this is really difficult to do, right? But yet Black women attempt to do it, right? Black fathers also attempt, right, to protect their children. And so it's an ongoing fight that I think is easy to take for granted when we look at the United States on its sort of face value and what we profess to say that we value versus what the reality really looks like for people on the ground.
You mentioned Trayvon Martin, and I mentioned earlier that we are celebrating this week the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. The actual anniversary is July 13, but on July 15, this Saturday here in Los Angeles, all day, 12 to 6 p.m. in Leimert Park, adjacent to this studio, we are just, again, celebrating their work and witness over this last decade. There'll be performances and a children's village and giveaways and all kinds of activities and vendors and speakers, including Cornell West, who takes the stage at about 4:30. So it's going to be a great day this Saturday, celebrating the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. When we come forward, since you referenced it in being at that protest rally in Cleveland, because you are a brilliant historian, I want to get your take as a historian on the impact, the legacy ongoing of Black Lives Matter in this country historically. We'll get that response from Dr. Tamika Nunley when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
The family of Keenan Anderson is suing the city of Los Angeles for $100 million. Maisha Cairo here with your K-Black Minute News, brought to you by CaliforniaBlackMedia.org. Keenan Anderson, a high school English teacher that was visiting Los Angeles from Washington, D.C., was tragically killed at the hands of the Los Angeles Police Department in January of this year. His family, alongside civil rights and personal injury attorney Benjamin Crump and Carl Douglas, have announced a $100 million lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. Crump and Douglas are representing Keenan Anderson's son, Sincere Anderson, and his mother, Gabrielle Hansel. The family is suing for civil rights violations, assault and battery, false imprisonment, and negligence on the part of the LAPD officers. The family of Keenan Anderson and attorneys Crump and Douglas want it to be known that this is only part of a systemic issue within the fabric of police departments everywhere.
The $5 cravings box is back at Taco Bell, and it's the real thing. We're talking a chalupa supreme, a cheesy, beefy 5-layer burrito, a crunchy taco, cinnamon twist, and a medium drink, all for just $5. That's a lot of food for not a lot of dollars. In other words, a wise business deal, like greeting clients with a firm handshake and a delicious 3-course meal. That's only $5. Order your $5 cravings box on the Taco Bell app today. At limited participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only while supplies last. Contact local store for price and participation which vary. Drinks exclude freezes. Price excludes tax.
Hosting a barbecue is a breeze, but managing my frequent heartburn, that was a lot more work. I would chew up to 10 antacids in one day. Now I take just one Prilosec OTC, and my heartburn is blocked for a full 24 hours. Just one Prilosec OTC a day gives me one-and-done heartburn relief, so I can go back for seconds on my world-famous burgers.
Prilosec OTC. 1 pill a day, 24 hours, 0 heartburn. It's possible while taking Prilosec OTC. Use as directed for 14 days to treat frequent heartburn, not for immediate relief.
Have you heard about Lendistry? Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered right here in LA. Once you've started your business, Lendistry provides flexible financing options starting at $50,000 to help you access the affordable capital needed to grow. Whether financing is needed to increase working capital, acquire a business, purchase inventory and equipment, or refinance debt, Lendistry has a solution for you. Lending products range from traditional business term loans and non-revolving lines of credit to SBA 7A loans and commercial real estate financing. Lendistry's pre-application process is simple and does not impact your credit score. Visit lendistry.com/KBLA to learn more and to get started with an application right from the website.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where everybody is somebody and nobody is a stranger. You belong here.
Professor Tamika Nunley mentioned Trayvon Martin moments ago. I should mention that Trayvon's mother, Sabrina Fulton, will be with us this Saturday in Leimert Park on stage as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. So there'll be a lot of mothers who've lost their precious babies and others who will join us this Saturday as we commemorate the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter all day this Saturday, 12 to 6 p.m. in Leimert Park. KBLA Talk 1580 is pleased to be the exclusive media partner of BLM for their 10th anniversary celebration here in Leimert Park this weekend. Should be a great day celebrating their work and witness this Saturday in Leimert Park. So again, Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon's mother, will be with us this Saturday on stage. All that said, Professor Nunley, we've been talking about black women and their precious babies and all that they had to endure in the antebellum era and all they're still enduring today. I want to ask, broadly speaking, your take as a historian on the cultural, the political, the social, the economic impact of Black Lives Matter 10 years in?
Absolutely. The impact has been enormous, not only in addressing police brutality and also holding police accountable, but also in thinking about sort of broader cultural developments and helping people understand how Black people experience racism and discrimination on a day-to-day basis. And they've been incredible in their capacity to organize in a very decentralized context, right, to organize more broadly among the masses of Americans, but also people who are protesting all over the globe in response to these sort of egregious acts of anti-Black violence. But not only is their impact felt in that sort of activist context and organizing context, but the impact is felt in even just the kind of event that you're hosting, right, to commemorate, right? One of the tenets of the Black Lives Matter movement is to combat these acts of violence by creating space for Black joy, for Black innovation and imagination, right, and centering those things, right? And so even as we think about police brutality and also the Black maternal health crisis, we are also fighting for Black joy, right, and for Black innovation and for us to sort of come together around how we envision our future moving forward. And that is also, right, a really important outcome of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I love that you're having Cornell West there because, one of the things that he's preached so much about in this season of his career is love, right? And how important love is. And as we think about sort of our collective existence as Black people in a very hateful and hostile world. And that in itself is a radical aim to organize around, right?
Yeah, he's been my friend and brother for over 30 years now, and I'm certain to your point, he will utter this phrase this Saturday. You heard it here first. It's almost difficult, almost impossible to hear Cornell West lecture anywhere without hearing this phrase at some point in his presentation, that justice is what love looks like in public. That's his line.
Yeah.
And he utters it all the time, that justice is what love looks like in public, to your point about his invocation of the notion, the power of love in most and many, if not all, of his presentations. So if you hear that phrase this Saturday, don't be surprised. Justice is what love looks like in public. It's worth interrogating. It's worth wrestling with. It's a powerful phrase, and I think it's true. You mentioned decentralization a moment ago. When we come forward in our remaining moments with you, Professor Nunley, I want to ask you what you make of the success of BLM, given how decentralized it has been from its inception. We were talking earlier today in our first hour about Occupy Wall Street and how they didn't survive as long as BLM has. And they were also decentralized, as you'll recall. And so there's something, I think, pretty magnanimous, something pretty amazing about an organization that can survive for 10 years, have the kind of impact it's had over that decade, and be so decentralized in its structure. We'll talk about that and a few other things when we come forward in our remaining moments with Dr. Tamika Nunley on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is an intervention. When we come forward, includes you. KBLA Talk 1580, turning pain into power.
If this were a Reese's TV ad, you'd be staring at a Reese's peanut butter cup. And sure, my voice is peanut buttery smooth, but still, you need to see the peanut butter cups, right? No? I can really just say Reese's and you'll go get some? Okay. Reese's. 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 Really working, actually. Reese's. Reese's. I'm on to something. Reese's. Reese's. Reese's.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Is this tree good for climbing? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
This is a special alert to all Americans who own a vehicle with less than 200,000 miles, with an auto warranty about to expire, or with no warranty coverage at all. Due to a decline in the economy, CarShield is announcing a low-cost, month-to-month vehicle protection plan that is now available to the public to save any driver out-of-pocket expenses on future auto repairs. repairs. Call now to find out how you can pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. Yes, you heard that correctly. Pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. An open phone line has been established for all drivers to call for a free quick quote. Call 800-381-8528 now. Drivers who are covered will not have to pay for covered repairs again. This protection plan is at an all-time low. Additionally, drivers who activate this vehicle protection today will also receive free roadside assistance, free towing, and car rental options at no additional cost. Call us for your free quick quote today. 800-381-8528. That's 800-381-8528. What do you have to lose? Call 800-381-8528. Again, 800-381-8528.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley, recipient of the highest honor in the talk radio industry, the coveted Freedom of Speech Award. At Talkers 2023, let's get back to more of Tavis right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
Got about 5 minutes left with Dr. Tamika Nunley. I've enjoyed this conversation, been empowered by it immensely, and a few other things I want to cover in the time that we have left here. I'll start with what I left off with before that break, and that is this notion of decentralization. You raised it. We discussed it to some extent in our first hour today. Again, I offer as Exhibit A, Occupy Wall Street, also decentralized, but didn't quite make it 10 years. Had an impact in real time. But the legacy of Black Lives Matter in this country, and as you mentioned earlier, globally, is pretty impossible to deny, and yet it is a decentralized organization. We don't often think of organizations decentralized having this kind of success a decade in. Your thoughts, Professor Nunley?
Absolutely. I mean, in the summer of 2015, Black Lives Matter organized a conference in Cleveland. And when we all went to that conference, what was incredible about it was people came from all over to this conference, people representing different organizations, people just representing themselves, wanting to know how they could do more. And then we all left that conference hoping to do our own kind of justice work, right? And I think so one of the things that Black Lives Matter does really well is to partner with people who are already doing that work on the ground at the local level, right? They're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? Even though you have Black Lives Matter chapters, it's not quite the same as we see with other organizations, say from the civil rights movement, right? And so what we see is they are actually tapping into resources on the ground and figuring out ways to fund support for them, right? Because they know better, right? In Cleveland or in Ferguson, right? Or in these local communities where people have been there for generations and know who their police are and know who their elected officials are and know what these neighborhoods are, and tapping into them as a resource and saying, hey, how can we get some of this money that we're getting more publicly and broadly, from this national attention to you? How can we get resources linked to you, and how can we work collaboratively? And so I think that collaborative ethos, that collective ethos, has been essential to sustaining the movement over time.
Yep. In the time that I have left, let me circle back to your book, The Demands of Justice, which examines the history of enslaved women's articulations of justice, the way they articulated justice then in the antebellum era. What say you about the ways that Black women today articulate their notions of justice in real time?
I mean, we see it in even the mothers, right, that you're going to spotlight at the event this week, right, is really centering the voices of the women who have been at the forefront of experiencing, right, the tragedy of injustice, the tragedy, right, of police brutality. When they are vocalizing what they've been through and what their experiences have been in this nation, that's the kind of articulations of justice. They're saying that there's something broken in our system. There's something insufficient, and they seek something more. They seek a more expansive and democratic reach of justice that has not yet been realized. And we're living in times in which so many of our sort of own legal access to justice is being foreclosed upon by the Supreme Court and by, the conservative movement, right, to diminish the rights of Black people and women, right? And so as a result, we are beginning to vocalize our dissent, right? Vocalize our dissent against what we see manifesting right before our very eyes. And so it begins with events like the one that you're having, right? That centering the voices of the people who have been at the forefront of this struggle, but have not yet received justice, right?
In the 60 seconds I have left, here's my exit question. How would you define the impact that black women have had on notions of justice in this country from the antebellum period until now?
Well, oftentimes black feminists will tell you, you can tell a lot about a nation by how it treats, right, its lowest members of society, right? And so until we began to really gauge sort of society's impact on these communities of people who have been on the margins and who have been neglected and who have been subject to this kind of violence, we really can't gain a pulse right, on the identity of a nation and what their values really are and what the reach of those values look like until we look at the people who have the least access to them.
Her name is Dr. Tamika Nunley. She's an associate professor of history at Cornell University and author of the book, The Demands of Justice, Enslaved Women, Capital Crime, and Clemency in Early Virginia. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely, Professor Nunley. Thank you for your time and your insights. Good to have you on our program.
Thank you for having me.
My great delight. Hour 3 of Tavis Smiley after news, traffic, and sports on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The Biden administration is defending its decision to supply Ukraine with controversial cluster munitions. In an interview with MSNBC, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Ukraine would be defenseless without the weapons. That's because he says traditional weapons stockpiles